Welcome to the Writing with Purpose podcast, inspiring readers, writers and nature lovers to embrace creativity and nature connection for positive well-being. I'm your host, Anna Walliscroft. Join me for heartfelt conversations about transformational journeys and practical tips with fellow writers, journaling guides and outdoor enthusiasts. Discover how writing, reading and nature connection can help you find clarity, spark creativity and live a more fulfilling life. Whether you're a seasoned writer, a curious beginner, or simply someone seeking a deeper connection to life, this podcast is for you. It's wonderful to have you here today. In this episode of the Writing with Purpose podcast, I'm joined by Gemma Holgate, author, ghostwriter, and founder of Maddison House Press. Gemma shares a powerful journey with words from being published at age 7, being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, to discovering her authentic voice and untold stories that sparked her mission to help others share meaningful narratives. From her unique wraparound publishing approach to her passionate belief that books must have a soul, this conversation explores how authentic storytelling creates positive change. Well, hello and welcome to the Writing with Purpose podcast. In this episode, I'm with Gemma Holgate, author, ghostwriter, publisher, book coach, and previously a wellbeing consultant and journalist. Gemma works with thought leaders, change makers, and positive impact pioneers to share their stories as beautiful books. And when Gemma hasn't got her head in a book or she's not crafting words, she can be found taking care of her baby girl, walking her very giddy miniature schnauzer Teddy, or drinking copious amounts of tea. Gemma, welcome to the Writing with Purpose podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. It's good to get stuck in, and shall we start with some quick fire questions to see where you stand on some of the literature and writing, so to speak. So what's the last fiction book you read, Gemma, and how would you describe it to someone new, either to that author or that particular genre?
So I'm currently reading a book called Barrowbeck by Andrew Michael Hurley. Andy actually taught me in college 20 years ago, and so it's fantastic. I went to one of his author events last year, and he signed a copy of the book for me. So I'm currently reading that. It is a book about a place rather than a group of people, and it is set over a period of sort of hundreds of years, and each chapter is a different story. But undercurrent to all of these stories is this sense of almost supernatural menace. So it's a very brooding, very unique book, but I'm just hooked. So I'm a few chapters in now, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it all develops.
Wow, sounds like my kind of book. That does. It's some undercurrents of supernatural or something that's a little bit psychological, and I wonder what this could be or where might this go.
Yeah, absolutely,
All
absolutely.
adds to the intrigue. And I think as well, when you know the person that's written a book, and if you know some of their behaviours or maybe some of their backstory, I find it really interesting when you read a book and you think, oh, if that came from the author or
Yeah. I mean, I know this is very different to other books that he's published. So yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of be able to compare it to some of his other work when I get to the end. But as I say, at the moment, I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
And what non-fiction book are you reading at the moment? And
so I'm currently reading Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes, and it is about how to write a romance book, because that is one of my next projects. I've had a little spark of an idea for a very cozy romance novel, and this was recommended to me around how to structure a romance novel.
yeah, beat as being the elements that happen to progress a story.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. So a nice cozy romance to come from Gemma soon.
Yeah, maybe next year. Yeah.
Brilliant. And then just kind of thinking back to childhood, what was your favourite childhood book? And do you think that shaped your understanding, or were you aware of that from an early age of being able to tell stories?
Yeah, one of the books that kind of stands out to me is more of a tween book, really, rather than a kid's book. But it was called the Wind on Fire trilogy. I'm trying to remember the author's name. I want to say William Nicholson, but please don't quote me on that. And it had this kind of um these kind of dual elements to it around sort of inner power and young people having power. And then this sense of kind of being slaves and being trapped as their family was taken. And I think it just kind of was really interesting for me from this perspective of the main characters are these kind of young people and the things that they're able to do and the way that they shape and influence the story rather than it being the adults that shape and influence the story. And there was something that I just loved about that, about having that voice and having that power and being able to do things regardless of your age. And I think that's something that, yeah, I've probably taken that with me and sort of felt like I've always kind of wanted to do things that maybe other people would think are scary. Traveling, going living across in New Zealand was one of them. Starting a business is probably quite scary. Well, it is scary. And just, being able to try those things and see what happens. So whether it was a direct influence, I don't know, but it was definitely a set of books that has stayed with me.
Yeah, sounds as though they were probably quite, you mentioned about the power of the characters, but quite empowering as well, from that age of being able to sort of take control of your life and, not necessarily see these goals and dreams and aspirations that might appear challenging to some people, but more about the adventure and the excitement of going out and achieving them, and it's just kind of perhaps embedded in you a little bit and sort of stayed with you then for some of those travels and opportunities and things that you've actually grasped rather than let them pass you by.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I used to read a lot of point horror books when I was younger. I don't know what that says about me. I think Goosebumps is quite popular at the moment, isn't it? From R.L. Stine, the author, and he used to write quite a lot of those point horror books. So, if you could invite four people to dinner, dead or alive, who would those people be, and how would they help you to explore the question of authentic storytelling and creating change in the world, which is something that you're quite passionate about as far as well-being is concerned.
Yeah, I think Robin Williams would be one of those. I think he had a really unique way of using humor as part of story and being able to use that to connect with people regardless of, you know, age, background, any kind of, potential barrier. So he would be one of them. I would have my granddad there. My granddad passed away a couple of years ago. His passing is one of the reasons that I got into publishing books. Just that sense of lost stories that are part of who he is and therefore ultimately part of who I am and who my daughter is. And they never got to meet. So if I could have him back for dinner, I would spend a lot of time talking about personal stories and experiences from a generational identity perspective.
Mm.
I would invite Jacinda Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand. Her New Zealand, well, I'll probably talk about it a few times, but it's a place that's incredibly special to me. I think the way that she is known for approaching leadership, again, is a really unique way of telling a story. The kind of underlying themes there of kindness and love that she's sort of quoted talking about. And then who would I invite for my final one? Somebody like Walt Disney, who again had a way of sharing stories that were timeless and reached multiple ages of audiences, and who has taken that idea of story and created it and made it into something that will last a very long time. And I think he'd be fascinating to talk to as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a great dinner gathering, a eclectic mix almost of minds, if you
A
like.
very
But
eclectic mix.
yeah,
Yeah.
at one
Yeah,
point
yeah.
I thought you were going to say the fourth person would be your daughter so that she could meet your granddad.
Ah, yeah, that
Yeah.
would be lovely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for sharing. I love journaling, as you know, and this podcast quite often is all about journaling. And I teach various ways for people to journal. And for yourself, Gemma, as somebody who helps other people to find their stories and tell their stories, what is journaling to you, and when do you reach for your journal as a companion? Because you do journal, don't you, as well?
Yeah, yeah. So for me, journaling is a way of putting things into perspective. I am a worrier. I always have been. And so for me, I journal just before I go to sleep at night. So my journal sits beside the bed, and my I call it my Heather Small journal. So
You
my
had the
the kind
small
of
journal,
my
as in
Heather
the
Small
singer.
journal, as in the singer. So the whole premise for me around journaling is, what have you done today to make you feel proud?
Oh,
So
brilliant.
it's being able to reflect on the day, look at the things that I'm proud of, and instead of going to bed overthinking and worrying about what's going to happen the next day, I go to bed with those kind of warm, fuzzy feelings of the things that, not just that I've achieved, but the things that I'm proud of that day, the things, maybe things that I've done, maybe things that um things that have happened. And yeah, it just really helps me to put things into perspective and to look for the good in the day. And I just find it really, really helpful.
Yeah. Oh, that's I really like that. You called that
Thank
the
you.
Heather Small and you pulled from the lyric from the song. But yeah, that's a great way for you then to be able to get a sound night's sleep. You've brain dumped a little bit, but you've focused on the positive of everything that's happened. And I think even if there is some challenges that take place throughout the day, there are the elements that we can be proud of, how we've handled that challenge, or a conversation, and then the outcome that's happened. Great, thank you for sharing. Do you have a certain technique that you use, and does that change based on what you're working on in your career, or maybe what's happening personally?
No, it's usually the same. I usually just start with the sentence, today I'm proud that, and I try and think of at least three things that I can write about. If I can make those kind of one, career, one personal, one something else, then I will do that. But there are days when things are quite sort of heavily weighted in one
Mm.
one direction or another. But yeah, at least three things that start with, today I'm proud that, and that's how I've done it for a while now, probably going on for sort of 9 to 10 years. Previously, I journaled as basically just a diary of things that I'd done during that day. And I found that I was then concentrating on some of the more negative things. And I read back through it one day and I was like, oh goodness, this is just a catalogue of misery. And and so I knew something sort of needed to change. And that's when I started doing you know, the proud element of my day.
Yeah, it's a great technique for people listening or watching to be able to try themselves. And if the I am proud of doesn't sort of land with people, then things that have brought them joy, what makes them happy. And so there's this kind of ways of being able to use a similar technique, but using language that people relate to. And I think what you said there about, reading back when you were keeping more of a diary log, sort of documenting the day rather than necessarily about how you felt about certain things and being proud of certain things. If you hadn't have written that down, you may never have noticed that
Yeah.
theme being a
Yeah.
bit negative, and the misery flowing from page to page almost. And I think that's a really powerful thing about journaling, that when we do write it down and we do take the time to reflect back over things, we do start to spot those trends and those those patterns and things. And it's then that we can give ourselves the opportunity to think, oh hey, can I change this? Or it just gives us more of a chance to be able to make a change from what we're spotting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. So take us back to your earliest memories of reading and writing, Gemma. And was there a moment when you realised that words had the power to connect and to heal?
So I think a lot of my earliest memories around reading are connected to the library. I remember, we lived maybe about a mile and a half away from our local library. And my mum would get our shoes on, all of us. And my brother's a lot younger than me, so there was a pram, there was always a dog involved, and we would make the trek up to the library. And I remember entering sort of reading challenges through the library over the summer holidays. How many books can you read? And attending sort of different workshops at the library as well, drama workshops and things like that, and just recognizing that libraries were this place, this communal place where all sorts of things could happen. It wasn't just about books. Um, I think when I learned about the power of stories, it's probably thinking about the kind of shared moments. So going back to my granddad, for example, my granddad had a tape with sort of stories and limericks and things like that. And I remember being in his car or being at my grandparents' house and then playing this tape and us kind of laughing together at it and being a part of that and listening to family stories from my granddad and parents and aunties. So I think that's probably where that sort of all comes from. I think that was the thing that kind of stuck with me. And when I did become a journalist, those were the kinds of things that I was really interested in. Those sort of more human interest stories, the people, their experiences, their adventures, rather than any of the sort of more newsy, political, gossip type stories that I sometimes had to work on. It was the big, you know, let's sit down and have a cup of tea and talk about who you are and the things that you've done. They were always the things that interested me.
Yeah, and they are the kind of stories that you really relate to people with, isn't it? You find that there's some kind of common thread there, be it a family history or be it an experience that somebody's gone through. Whereas I can imagine, yeah, if some of the political stories that local government or just things that have been happening in the community that you would have had to cover being completely different and probably more negatively charged positive. So I can imagine that was quite a challenge really. But yeah, when you started talking about the tapes, I remember my mum and dad used to have quite a few records, and we'd have stories and things on the records. And one of them that I just thought about when you were talking was Noel Edmonds, who used to do a lot of the chat shows and things like that. He had one of these, which was basically he'd ring people up and he'd prank call people. But there was always this sort of quite plausible situation that was going on. But the response that he got from some of these people, I mean, some of them were hilarious. Other ones, they probably put the fear of God into some of these people. I don't think you'd get away with some of it these days. But they were all sort of stories that were very relatable and very ordinary as well
Yeah,
times.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that,
And I think that's like you say, that's the relatable element to it, isn't it? It's we are all people. There's always certain parts of, we all have to go through education, we all go through relationships and things like that. And it's all that connects you to each other.
yeah, most definitely, most definitely. So I've got a copy of your book here, your 12 your 12 ways of well-being connected. So we'll include a link to this in the show notes as well. But you are actually published when you were 7, weren't you?
I
An
was.
anthology of poetry. So I'm wondering what that felt like at such a tender age, and also did that plant the seed for, how your career, your professional life might have progressed?
Yeah, so I think it most definitely did. I think writing and storytelling has always been something that I've loved. And so I wrote this little poem as part of this competition. And I wrote an acrostic poem about a new girl. And it got chosen to be part of this book. And I I had the book up until very recently, and I'm sure it's still somewhere in my parents' house. It was something that I really treasured. And again, it comes back to this kind of this theme around voice and having a voice and being able to share that at the age of 7. And so I think it probably did have a really big influence on how my career has progressed. If you'd have said to me then, what do you want to be? I'd have said a vet, because I wanted to be a vet right up until my late teens. But it was sort of always there. I always wrote stories. I always wanted to write a book, and to have these kind of adventures and have things to write about. It's now sort of gone full circle. So I am currently working on a book that is a competition for local children. So children in the Wigan Borough, which is where I live, have been invited to submit a story about kindness, and that book is going to be published in partnership with the local libraries at the end of November. So I'm trying to pass that love of reading and writing on, and offer those same opportunities for young people to feel like an author, because it was such a special thing for me.
Yeah, it's one of those proud moments that has
Absolutely.
you carried with you throughout the rest of your life. Yeah. And I think it's nice when you get those opportunities. I mean, that sounds like a wonderful project to work on, from start to finish, really, and just to see how the children that write the stories, what they start with, and how they go through that journey, and then the end piece that they've produced, and then putting that book together. It's going to be amazing. I'm volunteering as an assistant writer for the Spark Young Writers, which is just one Saturday every month. But that's great because, be able to see how and all the children that come, it's not something that they're forced to do. They're there when they want to do, which I think is great, because in school, they might be forced to do certain things. And if it's not a way that connects with them, then it potentially could put them off. Whereas this, they are able to explore something. So it's, yeah, things like that. They're happening all over the place, aren't they? You just need to find these little projects and get involved.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, they talk about sort of levels of reading going down in young people. So I think anything that people can do to help with that is just an amazing thing.
Yeah, most definitely. It's a great skill to have. So Gemma, your path took you from England to New Zealand, which you've already mentioned, and then back again. And during this time, and over the years, you've faced some of your own mental health problems. So can you share what that sort of period was like, for us, and how that sort of shaped your understanding of how we tell our stories to ourselves, but then, out in the wider world as well?
Yeah, so I think the most difficult period for me was after I came back from New Zealand. So I came back in 2013, and just really sort of struggled with settling back into to life in the UK. I kind of had this idea that there would be a Gemma-shaped hole left for me that I could just slot back into. But actually, when you've been away for 3.5 years, life moves on, people move on. Um, and so coming back, it was having to sort of rediscover who I was and where I sort of fit into things. In 2015, I was diagnosed with mild post-traumatic stress disorder after a sort of a series of things, really, rather than one particular big event. And I struggled with all sorts of things from migraines to flashbacks to really sort of vivid and terrifying nightmares. And I kind of just felt really, really isolated and found it really difficult to think about having a life going forwards. I just couldn't see a light at the end of the tunnel at all. And I think what that what the recovery process from that allowed me to do was to think about how much of my experience I read in my own voice and how much of it was in somebody else's voice, how much of what I understood about myself in particular. And I came to realize that a lot of the things that I thought I was or thought I had to be weren't in my voice. They weren't my own thoughts. They were things that had been put onto me or things that I'd learned or been conditioned to feel. And it kind of gave me this blank slate, really, to then go, okay, well, if I can now tell my story or live my story as who I am, who am I? And what do I want that to be? And the more I grew, the more I dug into that, the more me I was able to be. 5 years later in 2020, I left um, employed work and went self-employed. And so that was a really big part of that. Publishing my book was a really big part of that. And yeah, I just feel like it's allowed me to explore who I am and bring that into being.
Yeah, well, another moment to be proud of. I almost want to say you explained that in a kind of really easy and simple way to understand. You know how you were going through this low period, but you recognized what was your own voice and what was other people's voice. And I think there's so many people that can relate to that because, you know, it might be a teacher or it might be a parent or it might be an incident that happened in the past, that we still carry that with us, those words, that situation, maybe the actions, maybe our own behavior with us as we move forward, but not actually realizing that they're not us. They're
Yeah.
not our true, genuine self. So again, I sort of visualize these things when I have these conversations with people as you're telling your story. You know, you're talking about your voice and other people's voice. And I always imagined drawing a line down the page of a blank piece of paper and putting all the stuff that wasn't you on one side and all the stuff that was you on the other side, and then, you know, tearing it up, throwing away the other stuff, and realizing that there was this lovely fresh space that you could start anew and build on those elements that you knew were truly you, and just
Yeah.
expand on that with however you want, you know, however you wanted to, which is you know, again, sounds simple. It's not at the time because of everything else that's happening and that's going on. And, you know, our mind can be a powerful thing, both negatively and positively. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think there's kind of a little takeaway there that, you know, anybody that's got some of those voices perhaps still in their head, and that's a great way for them to visualize how to perhaps work around that, work through that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's incredibly empowering as well to be able to look at those things that maybe somebody has said, oh, you can't do that, or you're not that. And you could go, well, watch me. And actually, being able to do that and being able to see your own levels of strength and resilience and determination. And yeah, it's a very powerful thing.
Yeah, coming back to that trilogy that you read in your teens, taking the power and using it for your benefit and your greater good. So, Gemma, you've used you know, those experiences, you've used a lot of that, and you've given presentations and you've given talks on that in various settings. Did you see that was you know, kind of overcoming that period of life as a bit of a transition and a turning point for you in recognizing that healing power of sharing stories, and then for you then to go on and publish the book, and, you know, you took the leap to start Maddison House Press, the publishing company. Was that a definitive time in life?
Yeah, I think it's a Brené Brown book actually, where she talks about not using sharing your story as a way of healing, but doing the healing first and then just as a way of protecting yourself and taking care of the people that you speak to. And I think that's probably a really important distinction to make. Yes, going and speaking about my experiences was sort of a time that was really defining and allowed me to express the things that I'd learned, but I think it was important for me to go away and learn those things and learn the kind of boundaries of what I was comfortable to share and what I needed to keep to myself before I then stepped up and used that as a platform. So I think it was more of a realization that I'd healed rather than was in the process of healing. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there, because if you're still going through that process, potentially there's going to be a lot of rawness when you're sharing, and probably still a lot of negativity, or a lot of sort of the lowness rather than the highness of coming out the other side, that might then actually impact other people potentially in a negative way for them too.
Yeah.
And then, of course, waiting until you've sort of gone through and healed yourself, you've got that entire story then to share with people, lows, highs, middle rows, and however you want to share that. And then equally, I suppose, thinking about if you have questions and that, when you're sharing with other people and they have questions for you, and putting those boundaries in place, and having decided exactly what you were comfortable with sharing and what you weren't sharing, made that easier to answer questions and then engage with other people.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think, people are naturally quite curious about your experiences. But if there are things that are particularly painful to talk about, you have that protection in place before you put yourself into that situation. At the same time, as things progress, those boundaries can shift and you can share a bit more as you feel comfortable, but doing so in a way that's positive for everybody, and that's as uplifting and inspirational as possible. And I think that's important.
Yeah, as you're almost building those tools and strategies to be able to cope with things and share things. And yeah, I think as well, you mentioned before about having certain structures or certain conditions that we all feel as though we have to adhere to sometimes, these sort of social constructions and societal constructions that we feel we have to do it this way or we must do it that way, which isn't always the case. And quite often it's just somebody's opinion, which is valid, but then there are other approaches and other opinions as well. And I started off talking then because I was thinking about post-traumatic stress. And, a lot of people tend to associate that with, people who've worked in the army or the police or, something like that. Whereas it's quite normal for anybody to, suffer from. So it's almost a breaking down misconceptions, which I think is the whole point of people sharing their story, that you're not alone and this can happen. And it's just a way of bringing things to the surface that make it more mainstream or break down those misconceptions.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I am quite sort of almost quite strict on when I'm working with my authors, is that it's about those lessons. It's about how other people can build on your experience, and using that to have a positive impact, and like you say, break down some of those barriers and misconceptions. And so I try to make sure that the books that I'm working with, those same principles are applied there as well. I do have people that come to me and say, look, I want to write a book about my childhood traumas. And it's just getting then authors to think about, well, what's the purpose? What's the potential impact? How can we use this as a way that's going to be positive and insightful and influential and impactful for your audience? And yeah, just thinking about it that way.
Yeah, because it's healing in itself to be able to tell your story. But then when you're actually putting it into a book and you're putting it out there for other people to read, exactly what you've just said. It's important then for the reader to be able to have a takeaway from it and for them to understand how they can, interpret the story that someone else has been through, but take some of those elements to, work on something themselves, improve themselves, learn something new, whatever that is. It's almost like making sure that that angle is covered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not just, you mentioned, you don't just write your own books, you help other people to write their books, you ghostwrite books for other people, you coach them how to write themselves, you're in the publishing industry, so there's the editing and the proofreading and all of that, all aspects really of producing material and stories. So what does a typical day look like for you? And do you have sort of favorite parts? Because it's quite a multifaceted process, isn't it?
Yeah. So I call it wraparound publishing. So basically, if there's anything required from the seed of an idea right the way through to having your book printed and in your hands, we can support with that. There is no typical day for me, which is brilliant. But I can give you some examples of some of the things that I do. So yesterday was probably a great example. I spent most of the morning ghostwriting a chapter for a book. I managed to get that finished and sent across to the individual for them to look at. I did some book promotion on social media. I organized a speaking event for one of my authors. I took some pre-orders for the next book and posted out the free gift that comes with that pre-order. And then I came back and read a chapter from another author that had been sent through, gave them some feedback, and then liaised with the printer about what the sort of format of the next book. So it's a really kind of, yeah, I'm there from start to finish, and it's great actually. It's great just being involved in all different parts of the process, being able to support the author in whatever way I can. And yeah, being able to produce this book at the end of it and watch people unbox it and be so proud and happy of what they've done. So it's a really special thing.
Yeah, yeah, you can tell the way that you were talking, your whole face was lighting up about the different aspects. So, do you think being involved in all parts of that process helps you to be a better writer, but then also helps your clients to be better writers because you're able to share the entire process?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of parts of the process that I don't do. So I work with a professional editor and a professional proofreader. This is because I'm so involved in the writing and the developmental editing process. I cannot spot mistakes. I just can't. I know what it's supposed to say, and that is what I read. So I do work with a couple of fantastic freelancers, Lynn and Olivia, on those parts. But what I then learn from them is some of the ways of um, formatting sentences um, and grammar and structure and all of that side of it. That has definitely improved my writing. And I've been able to pass that on to the authors that I work with. I've also learned an awful lot about structure since I started publishing and the journey that you take your readers on in order for them to have a truly transformational experience. And again, that is something that I work with my authors sort of really closely. How do we go through those steps? How do we take the reader through those steps so that it has that kind of maximum impact and fulfills its potential as a story?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's I remember when I was studying one of the books that they recommended for structure, which I suppose is more of a fiction book, was Save the Cat. Yeah, being able to write certain chapters and use the process and being able to see the protagonist and the antagonist, which is, probably a little bit different to the non-fiction and or autobiographical side of things or memoir side of things. But yeah, I think you've got to have an element of structure. You hear people say that they're a pantser or they're a plotter, and you kind of one or the other. But I think there does, even if you're a pantser, there's got to be an element of structure there, otherwise it just wouldn't flow.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you've mentioned, I think this was in something that I might have read on your website, that books should have a soul. By hearing you talk and having this conversation, I can tell that kind of thing is very, that authenticity is very important to you. And so you feel quite sort of sad about artificial intelligence being, you know, increasingly more so prevalent in publishing. So I was just wondering, Gemma, if you could share your perspective on maintaining that authenticity in a society that is becoming increasingly automated, in our world, being assisted increasingly more with AI.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's all about connection. When you read something or you look at a painting or you look at anything that's been created, it's about having that connection with the art itself, but then a connection with the artist as well. We all have to study Shakespeare, okay? And we probably hate it at the time, but I could probably tell you more about Shakespeare than I could, perhaps some of the people that I know, because you build that connection, and it goes through time. It's not constrained by time. And so I think for me, the kind of sadness of things being, computer generated is losing that element of connection, that little kind of window into somebody else and feeling that. Because you do pour part of yourself into what you create. Most of the time it's tears, but you do pour part of yourself into it. And I'd hate books to lose that in particular. I'd hate for a book to be just words rather than it being a piece of somebody and a way of connecting. Yeah, that's my take really.
And that's what makes us truly human, really, isn't it? That kind of um those inner feelings, those thoughts, something artificial can never really generate that. And the combination of one person's experience and their thoughts and feelings and actions and behaviors around that might be very, very similar to somebody else, but the other person, that it's never going to be exactly the same. And that's part of that authenticity of when all of those lines blur almost, or all of that stuff is in that equation, that it's
Mm.
that one person who's able to describe that in a way. And that's the beauty of a great author, a great writer, isn't it? You're able to just make the reader see exactly what they're going through, as the author or the narrator, or however the book is positioned. And yeah, I love the thought of, having that connection with the art and the artist, or the artifact and the creator. And I think when you've got that connection, that's where a lot of inspiration and the ideas come from. Just going to a museum and seeing a piece and being drawn to that piece, and then all of that curiosity that surrounds that piece then can give, particularly an artist, not just a writer, but anybody who's kind of that creative minded. There's so much going on then that comes from that one thing, that connection that they've got, and it's beautiful what can be created from that.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is. And it's almost like a smile, isn't it? It passes itself on.
Yeah, so the tools, the computers can help us maybe refine certain things, but it's never going to create that essence where that
No.
truth comes from. So, I mean, that leads on beautifully, Gemma, to ask you where your inspiration comes from. You had that little nugget of an idea as well for the romance novel. Where do you get your inspiration from?
Yeah, so that inspiration came from just a moment of, oh my goodness, I can't do this. To be completely honest, I sat there and I thought, I'm just going to give it all up. I'm going to give it all up. I'm going to do, I don't know. I'm going to go into something else in teaching. And that was where it kind of all started. And you know, as a writer, as somebody who does journaling, I was like, right, well, I'll just write it all down. And the more I kind of wrote, the more it developed into a character's voice rather than necessarily what I truly felt. Like once I was done being dramatic, like I was okay. But the theme just kind of took on a life of its own. And so from a fiction perspective, I think it probably does start with that little nugget of truth, you know, really raw, honest truth, and kind of builds from there. I think from a non-fiction perspective and thinking about the inspiration there, for me, it's all about positive impact. You know, what is going to spark positive change, create positive conversation, you know, break down some, you know, potential barriers. And so I tend to look for stories and work with stories that do that in some way. They're the ones that I find the most inspirational, the ones that I'm the most excited to work with. And I often find that people who have those stories don't think that they're particularly special. You know, I had somebody come to me and say, oh, look, you know, I want to write my book, but haven't really done anything. And it turns out he was the 1975 karate world champion. And I'm like,
Oh,
no, actually, we need to talk about this. And so that, you know, is now one of the books that I'm working on. And he said to me today, actually, now that I've been doing the book, I've looked back and I've realized, actually, I've had a good life. And I was like, that's it. That's why we're doing this. Because not only have you been able to have that reflection and that sort of realization, but other people are going to take that as well and take something from it that you know, you can do anything. And yeah, I love it. Love it.
yeah. Again, your face just lit up as you were talking about those stories. But yeah, and it comes back to something that you said earlier about, you know, you're working with a professional editor and a proofreader, that sometimes when you're too close to the story, and that being yourself or being, you know, some of the authors that you work with, they just don't see the the sort of excitement or the adventure that they've had, or you know how things might be able to be seen through somebody else's eyes, because they are too close to that. And also, you know, particularly as English, we you know, we poo-poo our own ideas and our own experiences, don't we? And it's, oh, no one's going to be interested in that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But we're very good at that, much to my sadness, I think.
Yeah. Another big part of kind of inspiration for me is nature. So I was wondering what part nature plays in your life and in your writing, and whether you find stepping outside enhances your creativity, or you know, helps you to connect with stories differently in some way.
Yeah, I think for me, being out in nature almost has the opposite effect, which is exactly what I need. So a lot of the time when I'm thinking about stories, it's almost like being partly being somewhere else. So my body is here, but my brain is somewhere else. Whereas for me, nature is just that time to be really, really present. And I think that helps my creativity by giving my brain a rest, and just allowing me to not be somewhere else. Um, so I have a dog, Teddy. He's 7 months old. He is a handful. And so a lot of the time when I'm out and about, it's walking with him or with Maddison or both of them. And it's our time to just be together. And I love, you know, when I'm out with Maddie saying, oh, look, a bird or a squirrel, or look at the acorns that are growing on the trees, and just watching her kind of take it all in. And so, as I sort of said, it's not necessarily a place of being inspired, but a place of allowing me to be present, and then having that rest to be inspired elsewhere. So it's a really important thing for me. We moved house at the beginning of this year, and one of the things that were sort of our criteria really was being able to have sort of walks on our doorstep that we could go and do really easily, because that time is really special and important for me. And that's, exactly what we looked for when we moved. So yeah, being out in nature, different types of nature as well. I'm a huge Lake District girl. You have sort of beach people, don't you? Mountain people and seaside people. But for me, it's, being up in the Lake District, and just having that time to really look at what is around me and appreciate it and be there in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, being present with everything that's around you, and then that helps you to get out of your head and away from some of those ideas and let them percolate a little bit, maybe in your
Yes.
subconscious mind
Yeah.
before then you get back to it. Yeah, yeah. No, it's the Lake District is a lovely part of England, and yeah, somewhere where you can truly be in awe of everything that's around you, which again I think is quite a, although it's expansive, it's still quite a grounding experience, because as you say, you can appreciate everything that's around you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sounds
absolutely.
wonderful. Sounds wonderful. So, what would you be your advice for budding authors? You talk about having a plan. Can you explain a little bit about your four-stage reader journey framework, and why the structure, or why you think that the structure matters so much for someone that's coming to, tell a personal story?
Yeah, so having a structure does a couple of things. First of all, ensures that um, you take the reader on that journey, and that it has that kind of impact that you're hoping for, by allowing the reader to be guided by you through the different steps of their journey, and to have that kind of their own realization. And then having a plan also just helps keep everything on track. I've been absolutely guilty of it myself, where I've sat down and I've just typed out sort of, excuse me, 5, 10 pages, and I've gone, oh, look at me, I've been so productive. And actually, when I look at them, and I look at them through the perspective of where I'm trying to take my reader, there's probably 2 or 3 pages in there that can be kept, and everything else just needs to, it's just me waffling. And so it just helps to keep things on track. And I think when you're looking at sort of a typical sort of non-fiction book, and you're looking at sort of that 50,000 words mark, people think that sounds like loads and loads. But actually, once you start working your way through the framework, cutting it back to 50,000 words, and being really kind of precise and strategic, and really intentional about the words that you're putting in, a lot of that relies on having a really good plan to start off with. So for me, the sort of 4 main steps of sharing so this is for non-fiction, sort of sharing your life and sharing your lessons. The 4 things that you need to think about, firstly, is the here and there. So, where is your reader now, and where do they want to be? The second stage is the barriers. So, what stops them from getting there? Why are they turning to your book? What else have they tried? And being really mindful of, anything that potentially is a barrier for them. The third stage is what I affectionately refer to as the Yoda moment. So this is all about you, your experiences, your frameworks, the way that you impart your knowledge, the way that you train the Jedi in your reader. And so thinking about how you teach that, and how you can break that down. And then the fourth section is the kind of the revolution that comes from doing all of that. So what are the benefits of transformation and change, not just for the reader, but for their immediate local and wider communities. If they are to put in the time and effort to go through those steps that you've put in place for them, what's going to be the benefit for them as a reader, and what's going to be the benefit for the reader's community and wider connections as well. So they're sort of the 4 stages that I try and guide my authors through in order to really connect with the reader.
Yeah, giving them a bit of a journey of what comes first and then what to be aware of as they're telling the story along the way. And yeah, again, coming back to what you were saying before about making sure that, there's something there for the reader and it's not just you talking about, yes, it's your story, but the reader needs to have those takeaways from that.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, thank you for sharing some more great takeaways for people listening and watching. So Gemma, what's next for you and Maddison House Press, and what would you like to say to anybody that's got this kind of story bubbling inside and they don't know what to do next?
Yeah, so next for us is just growing from where we are. I think we have quite a good sort of niche now and reputation for working with the kinds of books that we do. We have 15 titles in progress under Maddison House Press, all kind of within that genre, but coming at it from so many different life lessons and different types of experiences. I think for anybody who would like to write a book, is just getting people to just think about what all great books, at the end of a great book, you should put it down and say, now I'm going to ... And as an author, if you want to write a book, my first thing for you would be, what do you want that ... to be in your reader? So if somebody puts down your book and says, now I want to, what do you want to inspire them to do? And I think once you've got that, you can then start building the framework around that outcome. And yeah, I think that's a really important sort of foundational question. And when I look at some of the books that I have read or books that I'm working on, I can see that really clearly. So, I look at me reading Romancing the Beat, I'm sure at the end she wants you to say, okay, well, now I'm going to go write a romance book. And that's absolutely worked on me. So yeah, that's the piece of advice I would give to potential authors.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think a question that if there's no substance there for the story, then it's something that is they're going to struggle with. People are going to struggle to answer. So yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question for anything, actually, not just writing a book, isn't it? But doing anything in life is just being able to ask that what is the ... bit going to be at the end of this? Yeah, brilliant. So how can people connect with you, Gemma, and find out more?
Yeah, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always really excited to get new connections and chat to people that way. Or you can get in touch with me via our website, which is madisonhousepress.co.uk, and you can find all the information on there.
Brilliant. Also, copy of the book, and how other people who've got those stories burning within them can contact you to work with them on that story. So thank you very much for being a guest on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I think there's been lots of takeaways that people can move forward with and use in their own writing journey.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's Writing with Purpose podcast. Having conversations with fellow writers or adventure enthusiasts brings two of my biggest loves in life together, writing and nature connection. I've been a copywriter and content creator for 23 years, but my passion is writing for well-being, and I'm on a mission to share the benefits that putting pen to paper has for personal wellness with as many people as possible. If you want to learn more about writing for your well-being and journaling techniques, please connect with me in my Facebook group, Journaling with Anna.